learning English smooth and enjoyable.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
It's great to be back.
Today we're tackling something pretty familiar. Mobile phones.
Yeah, those things we can't seem to live without.
Right. But we're coming at it from a really interesting angle, thanks to you, our listeners. Someone sent in a script, actually, and it's for an English language learning podcast. And I gotta admit, when I first saw it, I was like, okay, how's this gonna work? But the more I dug into it, the more I realized it's like this amazing window into how we think about and use our phones,
It's like looking at something ordinary through a new lens suddenly reveals all these hidden depths.
Exactly. So the script starts off, pretty basic. Mobile phones are so important in our lives.
True statement. Hard to argue with that.
Right. But then it takes off and lists all these different ways we use our phones, and it goes way beyond like making calls and texting, which is what we, I think, usually think about first.
Yeah.
It's like communication, information, entertainment, learning, even like staying organized and healthy.
Right. It's really remarkable when you think about it. Like all these things, all these different tools and functions packed into this one little device that we carry around with us everywhere.
It's like a Swiss Army knife of the digital age.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And just a few decades ago, you'd need a separate gadget for each of these things. Like a camera, a music player, a GPS. I mean, remember those giant road maps?
Oh, yeah. Folding them back up was like an Olympic sport.
Totally. But now it's all right there in your pocket.
And speaking of all those things you just mentioned, the source really goes in on how mobile phones have like revolutionized learning. And it's not just about fancy language apps or anything.
Oh, definitely. It talks about how phones have opened up all these possibilities for mobile learning. So education isn't limited to a classroom anymore.
Right. You can learn literally anywhere.
Yeah. You've got like a world of information in your pocket. You can take online courses, connect with other learners.
It's pretty empowering, especially for people who maybe don't have access to traditional education.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the most powerful things about mobile technology. It can really level the playing field in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I was super intrigued by how the script talks about the phone as a personalized language tutor. It's like you can listen to podcasts like this one.
Of course. Always plug the podcast.
Oh, gotta do it. But you can also practice vocabulary with apps or even connect with native speakers to like actually have conversations.
Yeah. It's almost like having a language learning ecosystem in your pocket.
Exactly. It's wild. Okay, so we've talked about how phones keep us connected and how they help us learn, but the source doesn't shy away from the social side either.
Oh, right. There's a whole section on using phones to stay in touch with family and friends, like social media, video calls, all that.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards. And I think it's really cool how the script approaches this. It's not just all sunshine and rainbows. It recognizes, that there can be downsides too.
Yeah, it's not afraid to acknowledge the potential for things like distraction and time management challenges, right? And maybe even feeling isolated sometimes, despite being so connected.
Which is kind of ironic when you think about it, right?
Totally. It's like this double-edged sword. Like these devices that are meant to put us closer can sometimes push us further apart. It's a really interesting point.
Hey, speaking of interesting points, the script digs into some of these hidden benefits of mobile phones, things we might not think about right away, like using our phones as memory keepers with all the photos and videos we take.
Yeah, like having a portable, high-definition history of our lives. I mean, I can't even remember the last time I used a regular camera.
Right. And it makes you wonder, does having all those photos and videos actually make us remember things better, or are we becoming like too reliant on our phones to do the remembering for us?
It's a good question. I don't know if there's a clear answer yet. It's probably a bit of both. Like, it's amazing to be able to look back on all those memories, but maybe we're not exercising our brains as much to recall details on our own.
Yeah, that's something to think about for sure.
Yeah.
And the script doesn't stop there with the hidden benefits. It also talks about how mobile phones help us, like, stay organized and on top of things.
Yeah, with all those apps for calendars, reminders, and to-do lists. I mean, I'd be lost without my phone's calendar, seriously.
I hear that. It's like having a personal assistant in your pocket.
Right. And all these tools kind of free up mental space,
Yeah.
Like you don't have to stress about remembering every little detail because your phone's got you covered.
Yeah, totally. But you know what? This brings up something else. It makes me wonder, are we getting maybe too reliant on our phones to like organize our lives? What if you forget your phone or the battery dies? It's like, are we becoming helpless without them? That's a good point. Maybe it's all about balance, right? Like using these tools to make life easier, but also remembering to, keep those mental muscles working.
Right, not letting those skills get rusty.
Exactly. Like don't completely outsource your brain to your phone.
Uh-huh. Okay, so shifting gears a bit here, the script also tackles the topic of mobile phone prices, which we all know can be a bit of a sensitive subject.
Oh, yeah. Like, it's no secret that some phones can cost a small fortune.
Right. And the script actually acknowledges that, like how prices can range from super affordable to like, whoa, did I just spend a month's rent on a phone? Expensive.
It happens.
Mm.
But it's interesting because the script also sort of delves into, the whole status symbol thing that comes with certain phone brands.
Yeah, like for some people, it's not just about functionality. It's about the brand name and the image that comes with it.
Yeah.
All right, it's almost like a fashion accessory. And the script does a good job of encouraging people to be, mindful consumers. Like, think about what features are really important to you. Do you really need the latest and greatest model?
Yeah, maybe an older model would work just fine.
Exactly. Or maybe waiting for a sale could save you a bunch.
It's all about being smart and making choices that align with your needs and your budget.
Right, don't just get swept up in the hype.
For sure. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. I'm feeling inspired and a little overwhelmed, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. But I think the main takeaway is that these little devices in our pockets, they're not so simple after all.
No, they're not. And our relationship with them is complex and constantly evolving.
And like we've been saying, finding that balance is key. It's about harnessing the incredible power of these tools without letting them, take over our lives.
Right. And figuring out what that balance looks like for each of us.
Exactly. Before we jump into strategies for finding that balance with our phones, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier about phones as memory keepers.
Yeah, the whole idea of having a camera in our pocket practically all the time.
Right. It's so easy to just snap a photo or take a video of pretty much anything these days. It's like
Oh.
we're constantly documenting our lives in a way that, previous generations couldn't even imagine.
It's true. I mean, think about it. It used to be that you'd only take pictures on special occasions like birthdays or vacations. Now it's like every meal, every outing, every funny face our kids make, it's all getting captured and stored digitally.
And that's what makes this so fascinating to me. It's not just about those big events anymore. It's the everyday moments, the little details, things that might have otherwise faded from our memories.
It's almost like our phones are becoming these external hard drives for our brains.
Exactly. And that raises some really interesting questions about, how this constant documentation is affecting our cognitive processes. Like, are we actually remembering things better because we have all these visual reminders?
Or are we becoming so reliant on our phones to do the remembering for us that our own memories are getting weaker?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
like, that old saying, the palest ink is better than the best memory. But now we have these thousands of high-definition inks documenting our lives. So what does that mean for our own internal memory banks?
It's like, are we trading the depth of our memories for the breadth of them?
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox. And there's actually some research that suggests that relying too heavily on photos and videos might hinder our ability to form strong memories on our own.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
when you use GPS to navigate somewhere, you might get to your destination, but you're less likely to remember the route if you didn't have to figure it out yourself.
That's a great analogy. It makes me think about all those vacation photos I take. I wonder if I'm actually fully present in those moments, or if I'm just focused on getting the perfect shot for Instagram.
That's a valid point.
Yeah.
It ties into that bigger question of mindfulness, right?
Yeah.
Are we using these tools to enhance our experiences, or are we letting them distract us from actually living them?
Food for thought, for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so shifting gears a bit here. The source also mentions the role of mobile phones in helping us stay organized and on top of things.
Yeah. All those apps for calendars, reminders, to-do lists. It's like having a personal assistant in your pocket.
Exactly. And it speaks to this idea that our phones are becoming extensions of our brains in a way, helping us offload tasks and free up mental space. I mean, think about how much we used to rely on our memories to keep track of appointments, birthdays, deadlines.
Oh, I know. It's like our brains are constantly juggling all these things. But now it's like our phones are taking on some of that mental load, which is great, right? But it also makes me wonder, is there a point where we become too reliant on these external tools?
Yeah, that's the flip side of convenience, isn't it? Like, what happens if we forget our phone or the battery dies?
Mm-hmm.
Do we just completely fall apart?
Right. Like, oh no, I can't remember what I'm supposed to be doing today. Where's my phone?
It's like we've outsourced our brains to our devices. Maybe it's about finding that middle ground,
Yeah,
you know, using these tools to streamline our lives, but not letting them become crutches.
for sure. And, speaking of balancing things, I want to bring up something else the script mentioned, something that I think a lot of people can relate to.
What's that?
Mobile phone prices. I mean, it's no secret that phones can range from being pretty affordable to, well, kind of shockingly expensive.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, some phones cost more than a laptop. And the script actually dives into this a bit. It acknowledges that for some people, mobile phones have become status symbols.
Right. Like, it's not just about having a phone that works. It's about having the latest model, the name brand, all that.
It's like for some people, it's more about the image they project than the actual functionality of the device.
Yeah, it's like a fashion statement almost.
Mm.
But, I appreciate that the script encourages people to think a little more critically about their purchases. Like, do you really need all the bells and whistles?
Right. Maybe an older model would work just fine. Or maybe waiting for a sale could save you a bunch of money.
Totally. And, speaking of making mindful choices, let's get back to this idea of finding balance with our phones. The script talks about some practical things we can do, like setting limits on our screen time, choosing specific times and places to use our phones, and really making an effort to prioritize those face-to-face interactions.
Yeah, those are all great strategies. And I think it all boils down to being intentional, right? Like, instead of letting your phone dictate your day, you make conscious decisions about when and how you use it.
It's about taking control, right? Like, instead of being reactive to all the pings and notifications, we're proactively deciding how we engage with our devices.
Exactly. And one thing I like to do is designate certain times as phone-free zones, like during meals with my family or when I'm out with friends. It really helps to create space for those real-life connections.
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to try that. It's so easy to just get sucked into that endless scroll. It's like a black hole of time.
Ha, totally. And even when you are using your phone, try to be more present and engaged. Like, put your phone away when you're having a conversation with someone. Resist that urge to constantly check for notifications.
It's like be where you are, right? And be fully present in that moment.
Exactly. And I think this all ties into another important point that the source touches on, the potential impact of excessive phone use on our mental health. Like, how being constantly connected can actually lead to feelings of stress, anxiety, and even loneliness.
It's ironic, isn't it? The very devices that are supposed to connect us can end up making us feel more isolated.
It's true. And there's a growing body of research that supports this. Studies have shown a link between excessive social media use and increased rates of depression and anxiety, especially among young people.
I've definitely heard about that. Like the constant comparison to other people's seemingly perfect lives on social media can really mess with your self-esteem.
Totally. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of how we're using these platforms. The script actually suggests some helpful things we can do, like being more selective about who we follow, muting notifications from certain apps, and even taking breaks from social media altogether if it's starting to feel toxic.
It's like curating your digital environment to protect your mental well-being.
Exactly. And I think that's such an important concept. We have more power than we realize to shape our online experiences and create a more positive and supportive space for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. It's about taking back control, right? Like instead of feeling like we're at the mercy of these algorithms and notifications, we can make conscious choices about how we engage with the digital world.
Exactly. And speaking of engaging with the digital world, I want to bring up something else that the script highlighted.
Okay, what's that?
The role of mobile phones in teamwork and collaboration, like how they've become essential tools for businesses and organizations, especially with all those apps for video conferencing, document sharing, project management.
It's true. I mean, think about how much things have changed in the past few years, especially with the rise of remote work. It's like we can now collaborate with people all over the world from, well, pretty much anywhere.
It's pretty amazing. It's like mobile technology has completely broken down these geographical barriers and created a much more interconnected work environment.
Yeah, the possibilities are pretty incredible. But this seamless connectivity also brings up some important questions about boundaries and work-life balance. It's like, if we're always connected, when do we actually get to disconnect?
That's a great point. Like, with work emails and messages constantly popping up on our phones, it can be really hard to switch off and recharge.
Yeah.
It's almost like that line between work life and personal life has become blurred.
Right. It's like we're always on, even when we're not technically at work.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have those conversations both within ourselves and within our workplaces about setting boundaries and expectations around communication and availability. Like, just because you can be reached 24/7 doesn't mean you should be.
It's about respecting those boundaries, both for ourselves and for each other. And I think it's something that we as a society are still figuring out, like
Yeah.
how do we navigate this new world of constant connectivity without letting it completely take over our lives?
It's a good question, and I think it's an ongoing conversation. As mobile technology continues to evolve and become even more integrated into our lives, we need to keep having these conversations and keep searching for that balance.
Well said. And on that note, let's take a moment to digest everything we've talked about so far. We've covered a lot of ground, from memory and mindfulness to the complexities of work in the digital age. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts and some key takeaways for navigating this ever-evolving world of mobile phones. All right, we're back for the final part of our mobile phone deep dive.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? Starting with that English language learning script and ending up talking about, well, pretty much everything.
Yeah, memory, relationships, work, even our mental health.
Hmm.
Who knew a simple script could lead to so many fascinating discussions?
It's a testament to just how intertwined our phones are with our lives, They're not just gadgets anymore. They're like extensions of ourselves.
So as we wrap things up here, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? Like, what can we all do to make sure our relationship with our phones stays a positive one?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about recognizing the incredible power of these devices. Like, they've revolutionized the way we communicate, the way we access information, even the way we learn and create.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that, We
Yeah.
just take it all for granted.
Right. But it's worth pausing for a second to appreciate just how transformative this technology has been. And I think that script we talked about did a great job of highlighting those sometimes overlooked benefits.
Yeah, like using our phones to stay organized, to capture memories, to even spark creative inspiration. It's like we have a whole toolkit in our pockets.
Exactly. But of course, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's really the core message here. It's all about balance. It's about being mindful of how and when we use our phones and making sure they're enhancing our lives, not consuming them.
Right, like finding that sweet spot where we're using these tools to our advantage without letting them take over.
Exactly. And that sweet spot might look different for everyone. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
It's about being honest with yourself, right? About how your phone is impacting your life and making adjustments if you need to.
Exactly. Like, it's an ongoing process. We have to constantly check in with ourselves and make those conscious choices about how we integrate these devices into our lives.
It all comes back to being intentional, right? Like instead of just mindlessly scrolling or checking notifications all day, we can be more deliberate about how we use our phones.
I love that word. Intentional. It's about being in the driver's seat,
Yeah.
making those conscious choices instead of letting our phones control us.
And the good news is we have more control than we think. Like we can set boundaries, we can create healthy habits, we can even just put our phones down and walk away for a while.
Right. It's not about demonizing technology or going off the grid completely. It's about finding a healthy and sustainable relationship with these devices.
And ultimately, it's about remembering that technology is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It all depends on how we choose to use it.
Well said. And, that brings us to the final thought from the script. It talks about how mobile phones can inspire us to learn about other cultures and plan trips.
Yeah, and it got us thinking, what's a place you've always wanted to visit?
I've always wanted to see the Northern Lights in Iceland. What about you?
Oh, that sounds amazing. I've always dreamed of going on a safari in Africa. And you know what? I bet our phones could help us plan those trips.
Exactly. It's incredible to think about how these little devices in our pockets can connect us to the world, help us learn, explore, and even fulfill lifelong dreams.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our mobile phone deep dive. Thank you so much to everyone for listening and for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep finding ways to make technology work for you.
Until next time.